My name is Shelby Magid. I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm especially excited that the Atlantic Council is a partner for the forum, so please allow me a special thank you to the Atlantic Council's longtime friend, Alexei Goncharenko, and the rest of the Board of the Advisors for this forum. You always make our work better in Washington with your insights. Thank you for sharing your time, and now I'm glad to be here with you. So I'm also especially glad to be following distinguished openers of the forum, fittingly Ukrainian and American, and I'm glad to be following the good news of our continued security and agreements from America. So thank you for sharing that and bringing in such wonderful speakers. Now I'll turn it over to our speakers after I do an introduction, and at the end of this panel we'll also take audience questions, so please get your questions ready for our panelists. As there's much to discuss in the Black Sea, as you heard in the opening, it's fitting that the first panel today is titled Battleship, Ukraine Overpowers the Black Sea Fleet, Rewriting the Game's Rules. And I'm honored to welcome to this stage experts, including top analysts and former officials, as well as Ukraine's brave defenders who are actively contributing to keeping us safe in the accomplishments of Ukraine in the war. Thank you for taking the time out of your efforts to join us today. And we owe a special thank you to you all. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Colonel Mykhaylo Tretiak, Chief Specialist of Ukraine's Marine Unmanned Systems Development within the Department of the General Directorate of Unmanned Systems. We also have Commander Mamuka Mamulashvili, the commander of the Georgian Legion in the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Commander has been with the Georgian Legion since forming it in Ukraine since 2014, and since February 2022, he and his soldiers have played a very active role on the front lines. I'd also like to mention our audience may have seen some news today that came out about Commander Mamulashvili's health and a potential poisoning that took place. But as you can see, he has not been deterred from his great efforts, and he is here in good health, and applaud you. Just adding to your badge of honors, the Georgian Legion was also just recognized as a terrorist organization in Russia. So continue the good work. Joining us virtually, whenever the situation allows him, we will also have General Wesley Clark. General Clark has 38 years of service in the United States Army, where he rose to the rank of 4-star general and Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He's had numerous U.S. and foreign military awards, including the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom. General Clark is one of the most active advocates for support in Ukraine, and he's also an Atlantic Council director from the board. Also with us in person is Colonel Richard Kemp, commander of the Order of the British Empire. Colonel Kemp served in the British Army for 29 years, spending most of his life fighting terrorism and insurgency, commanding British troops on the front line of global hotspots, including Afghanistan, Iraq, the Balkans, and Northern Ireland, and is also a fierce advocate for Ukraine. Thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, I've got a friend and colleague from Washington, D.C., Luke Coffey, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he works and focuses on Europe, Eurasia, NATO, and transatlantic policy. Before his time in D.C., Luke was with the UK's Ministry of Defence as the first non-UK citizen appointed by the Prime Minister to the position of Special Advisor to British Defence Secretary. And General Clark, great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your patience as we deal with Russia trying to stop us. But we are here, and you are with a distinguished panel. Thank you for your time. So we have a fantastic group, and I'm going to start with you, General Clark. Can you kick us off?
I sure will.
All right, sir.
So, look, first, it's a real honor to be there, and I congratulate you on putting together this forum, because getting attention to the Black Sea as a critical avenue of approach to Ukraine and a critical piece of Ukraine's economic and military security has been a real and significant part of all the efforts we've gone through over the last 2 or 3 years. We've really got attention on this issue now, and that's my first point. Second point is to congratulate the Armed Forces and Intelligence Service of Ukraine for the fantastic work they've done in clearing off so much of the Russian Black Sea fleet and making it possible for shipping to resume and make it much more difficult for Russia to harbor its ambitions of an amphibious assault on Odesa and sealing off Ukraine from its access to the Black Sea. My third point is simply this: there's technology to go after submarines. The Russians have the submarines in the Black Sea. It can be done remotely by sea babies. They just have to be properly equipped, and the software has to be worked out. And those are two things that I know Ukraine can do. So if I were a Russian submarine commander, I'd be very worried about what's coming next in the Black Sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I'll turn it over to you, Colonel Tretiak. You've been in the military defending Ukraine since before the full-scale invasion started. In fact, on June 14th, 2014, exactly 10 years ago, the personnel military unit A1387 of the South Air Command of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, consisting of 6 servicemen who remained loyal to their oath under the command of then Major Tretiak, completed the relocation order and the withdrawal of weapons and military equipment in full from the Zhenkoy airfield in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea to the Tanakove airfield, where the Ukrainian flag was solemnly raised. By the end of July 2014, the personnel of the military unit had begun receiving the first aircraft of the restored airfield. Now, 10 years later, here we are. Colonel, do you have any additional thoughts following General Clark's points on how Ukraine has changed the balance of military power in the Black Sea, and how Ukrainian resourcefulness, innovation, and new technologies and military tactics influence the Battle of the Black Sea? In addition, how have Ukraine's military actions and ability to counter the Russian Black Sea fleet evolved, and how does Crimea fit into this?
Доброго дня всім. Mykhaylo Tretiak. На жаль, начало.
Unfortunately, I haven't heard the start of the question, but I now understand what is meant. Yes, over the last decade, our country has been defending from the enemy, our northern neighbor. And at the moment, we have more than 2 years of the full-scale invasion. And despite this, we continue our struggle, we continue our fight, because we know that we will be definitely victorious. As for the help, as for the assistance, because I couldn't hear the interpretation somehow. As for the support of the NATO country parties, I would like to say the following. Yes, we are really very thankful. And apart from our spirit, about the spirit and morale of our military forces and our people, the partners' support is very important to us. Thank you.
Now, Colonel Kemp, I'll turn it over to you. How has Western support impacted Ukraine's efforts to counter Russian aggression in the Black Sea space and success in overpowering Russia's Black Sea fleet? Has there been sufficient Western support, and is there enough allied understanding of the threat of Russia in this region in particular?
Thank you very much. Before I answer that, I'd just like to say what a great pleasure it is to be here and to be invited to this forum. This is my first time in Odesa. I'm looking forward to getting to know the city a bit while I'm here. It's a beautiful city from what I've seen already. I've been to Ukraine a number of times since the war began, and I've been able to witness firsthand Ukrainian armed forces and special forces fighting on the front lines against the Russians. And I've been in many different combat zones during my military career. I've been deeply humbled and impressed by what I've seen of the Ukrainian armed forces fighting back so hard, so professionally and so effectively against the Russians. And everyone in this room who is Ukrainian can be immensely proud of your armed forces, and those of us who are supporting Ukraine from overseas are also extraordinarily proud of their achievements. In answer to the question, I think the international support has been impressive. And I think right from the beginning, it was significantly greater than President Putin expected it to be. I think he expected, first of all, for Ukraine to just roll over when he invaded, and his intelligence was clearly mistaken. And I don't think he expected the level of backing that the Western world would give for Ukraine. But having said that, we simply haven't done enough. Whether it's the United States, which has been the leader in the international effort to support Ukraine, particularly militarily, whether it's the UK or other European countries, we have just not done enough. The US in particular has supplied Ukraine with enough weapons, munitions, and intelligence and other resources to enable them to effectively defend against the Russians. But they have not supplied enough to enable Ukraine to push the Russians out. And I think that became pretty clear during the summer offensive, in which the Ukrainian army fought with enormous courage, but without enough hardware, whether that be artillery shells, aircraft, long-range missiles, mine clearance equipment, other obstacle clearance equipment, or whatever. There was simply not enough of it. And I regret to say that that has been compounded, that situation, by the freeze on American military resources that occurred in the last 6 months or so, now hopefully resolved. But nevertheless, I think our countries do need to put significantly more effort into giving Ukraine the wherewithal, not just to defend itself as it's doing now, but to then go back onto the counter-offensive. I'm slightly concerned about that, because I do believe that President Biden, despite the pact that he has signed yesterday, I do believe that President Biden would like to pressure Ukraine into coming to a ceasefire agreement with President Putin sometime before the US election. I know that Luke Coffey beside me disagrees with that, and he probably knows more about it, being an American, than I do, being a mere Brit. But that's the feeling I get, and I think that would be a tragedy and a devastating result for Ukraine if it was forced effectively by starvation of US resources into going on to into basically entering a frozen conflict. As far as the Black Sea is concerned, as General Clark said, and as others have said, we can be full of admiration for the extraordinary result that a country with virtually no navy has been able to defeat one of the largest navies in the world in the Black Sea. Quite an extraordinary achievement, which I don't think many people would have predicted. And I think Western support for that has also been critical, as well as Ukrainian courage and technological innovation. The level of support that has been critical, I think, has been drone surveillance provided by satellite surveillance provided by the West to help Ukraine to target its offensive assets against Russian ships. And secondly, drone surveillance also, which is critical. And these ultra-high-tech capabilities from the West have enabled the slightly less high-tech, but nevertheless extremely impressive assets of Ukraine to do so much damage to the Russians.
Thank you, sir. And I will take the moderator's prerogative and say I agree with you about not enough U.S. assistance, and I sure hope you're wrong about President Biden. And that is why it is so important to have these discussions, our panelists here and all our partners here, to keep pushing on the American administration. So thank you for your help with that. Now, Commander Mamulashvili, I'm going to turn to you. So we all watch the news about the front lines, but you're there fighting and witnessing what is happening firsthand. Could you please give us an overview of what's happening on the front lines now, what your priorities are as a Legion, and whether the state of the war in the Black Sea and technologies used by the Ukrainian military there impact your own efforts to counter Russian aggression? And what role do Marine drones play? Thank you.
Hello, glad to see you all here, and thank you for coming to Ukraine and being brave to come to Ukraine in such hard times. I would like to speak about Black Sea warfare a little bit and about just generally what's going on front lines. Ukraine still needs artillery shells that we don't have enough, and the amount that is sent to Ukraine is not enough for the missions that we're doing on the front line. So I'd like everybody to know that Ukraine needs much more ammunition than you can imagine. Today we're discussing Ukraine's game-changing action in naval warfare, especially against the Russian Black Sea Fleet. The key point is clear. When Ukraine is given full freedom to act without restrictions from Western partners, it achieves incredible results. Ukraine organized a highly effective military campaign against Russian targets in Crimea and the Black Sea Fleet, using both domestic and Western capabilities, like drones, long-range Anglo-French cruise missiles. The campaign built on previous successes like sinking the flagship Moskva and recovering Snake Island in 2022. Last summer, Ukraine intensified the efforts with several successful strikes. These actions led to the destruction of the Black Sea Fleet headquarters and the personnel in Sevastopol during senior commanders' meeting, and eliminated more than 20% of personnel and fleet. Ukrainian drones travel more than 800 kilometers to hit Russian ship near Novorossiysk, showing that even distant Russian ports were vulnerable. And in conclusion, Ukraine's recent success show the importance of giving it full freedom to act. With the right support and autonomy, Ukraine can achieve outstanding results. This is strong case for continuing supporting Ukraine, fully helping it secure its sovereignty and reshape the rules of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, Luke, thanks for your patience. Over to you. You are the co-author of a recently published Hudson Institute report, which I recommend reading and you can find online, called A Strategy of Courage, the Next Phase of the Russia-Ukraine War, and a related Crimea First Strategy for Ukraine fact sheet. In these, you provide suggestions to the U.S. and allies on how to enable Ukraine for this Crimea First strategy, and you note the importance of both the Black Sea and Odesa. Can you explain the main components of this Crimea First strategy and compare it to the current American and allied approach, and what needs to change?
Thanks, Shelby, for that question. And I want to echo everyone's thanks to Alexei and the generous support from Lord Ashcroft and the cooperation with the Odesa City Council putting together this fantastic event, but also Alexei's staff, who has worked tirelessly to, I would wake up in the East Coast with numerous WhatsApp messages, and I'll try to be quick to reply. I probably wasn't as fast as I should, so they were very patient with me. So I just want to echo those thanks. And then I saw Mamuka today, and I saw also the news about the Georgian Legion being a terrorist organization now, according to Russia. And I asked him, what took you so long? I'm a bit disappointed it took so long to get this designation. And he responded saying he thought they already were designated as a terrorist organization in Russia. So my report that I co-authored with my colleague Peter Rao, entitled A Strategy of Courage, is exactly what is needed. We need President Biden to want Ukraine to win this war more than he just hopes that Russia might lose it. And we need... And we need him to find this courage to do this. We need to have a U.S. administration, a U.S. Congress, a U.S. national security class that understands and recognizes the historical times in which we live. And then we need to shape an outcome that best benefits the United States and our allies, and most of all, Ukraine. And I'm not certain that we are at this point. We saw the terrible delay in the U.S. Congress, which I know was costing lives here in Ukraine. I was back in Odesa and up in Kyiv in March, and I was shocked to learn that not only were Ukrainians running out of artillery shells, but also small arms ammunition, bullets. I just find this extraordinary that in the 21st century, a modern army could be running short on small arms ammunition. But even if Congress allocates all the money Ukraine needs, we still need the courage in the White House to allow Ukraine to do what it needs to do to win this war, and that is to strike targets, whether they're inside the Russian Federation or not, to use long-range weapons and to provide long-range weapons to the Ukrainians in a timely manner and in the quantity that is needed to have an impact. Now, in this report, I highlight 4 steps that should be taken now that the authorization has been approved by Congress, and I call them the 4 S's. The first one is stabilize. We need to urgently rush to Ukraine the munitions, the equipment needed to stabilize the situation on the front lines that resulted from the destabilized situation on the front lines resulting from the 6 months of delay from Congress acting. The second S is superiority. We need to give Ukraine the air defense systems, more Patriots, more F-16s to get air superiority in the skies, certainly at a tactical level, but preferably over the full skies of Ukraine. The third S is strike. We need to give Ukraine the weapons, long-range weapons it needs to strike and make Crimea uninhabitable to the Russian occupiers. Every airfield, every port needs to be a target. Every oil refinery, the Volga-Don Canal that transports ships from the Caspian flotilla to the Sea of Azov and back and forth, all the airfields inside the Russian Federation, and even if this naval base in Russian-occupied Abkhazia in Georgia, even if this naval base in Abkhazia is built and realized, that should become a legitimate target. We should make it that the Black Sea Fleet has no safe spot in the Black Sea region whatsoever. And then the final S is scale up. We need to scale up training. We're focused on ATACMS, we're focused on F-16s, and at the end of this day, what's going to win this war for Ukraine are the young men and women fighting in the trenches, fighting block to block in cities and towns. We need to make sure that we help the Ukrainians scale up their training, their basic training, as Ukraine mobilizes. And I know this is a challenge for Ukraine, but as you mobilize, we need to help with training and get these soldiers ready for frontline service in a way that is fast, safe, and successful. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Colonel Kemp, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some lessons and takeaways. So Britain is a great naval power and must be watching these developments closely. What do you think we've seen from the Black Sea about the need for a modern fleet, and from your vantage point as a representative of a nation that has for centuries considered a naval presence to be of significant importance? Has Ukraine's triumph in the Black Sea impacted or redefined the rules of warfare?
I've already cast a slightly gloomy perspective over this conference with my remarks about my thoughts on President Biden's future intentions. But I also want to be slightly negative about the UK being a great naval power. It was once. But after many decades of cutbacks by successive governments, the Royal Navy is not what it was. And just as a couple of examples of that, we've seen in recent years, we've seen 2 unsuccessful nuclear test launches of Trident missiles carried out by the UK. We've also seen the UK allying with the United States in the fight against the Houthis in the Red Sea, and we've got 2 extremely expensive aircraft carriers which are sitting in Portsmouth, which should be down there in the fight, but instead of that, we've had aircraft flying 3,000 miles from Cyprus to deal with the Houthis with very reduced payloads and a need for mid-air refueling, which is obviously a very inefficient way of doing it. So I appreciate you referring to the UK as a great naval power. It's a big one, and it's one of the biggest in the world, but it's not any longer, unfortunately, what it was. In terms of the lessons, I think we need to be slightly cautious about saying that the Ukrainian success against the Black Sea Fleet has redefined the rules or the order of naval warfare. I think it may well have done, and we've certainly seen some extraordinary events which will undoubtedly have many admirals in their different palaces back in the UK or wherever, other countries very worried about this. But as I say, I think we need to be slightly cautious about learning too many lessons from a conflict against what could also maybe once have been described as a great naval power, but clearly isn't today. And I think if you use similar tactics against the US Navy today, I think there might be different results from what was achieved here in the Black Sea. I do think that there is a need to look at the balance, perhaps, shall we say, between large surface ships and submarines. I think we may be entering an era where we're going to be seeing more emphasis placed on subsurface vessels, whether manned or unmanned, and also on smaller surface vessels, unmanned again. So I think there could be a shift in the nature of naval power, but I don't see this as being sort of signifying the demise of the large warships, and particularly not aircraft carriers. People have predicted, when this war began here and as it evolved, people predicted the obsolescence of the tank. And that certainly isn't. People have been predicting the end of the tank for many years, and I certainly think that's not true. We've seen tanks being used very, very effectively, even as we speak in Gaza now by the Israeli army. So I certainly don't think the tanks ended. And equally, when the machine gun was invented, people saw that as the end of the infantry, but we still have infantry, over a century later. So I think the demise of the aircraft carrier and other major surface vessels, I don't think we can predict with any great confidence, although I do think, as I said, that we can expect to see probably a shift in the balance between unmanned vessels, manned vessels, large, small, use of long-range missiles from maybe unmanned subsurface or surface-level vessels, maybe taking over some of the functions that aircraft carriers have had up until now. And that in itself will, I'm sure, I think the British Army is renowned for, I think we've got more horses than we've got tanks in the British Army today. And the Royal Navy admirals are beloved. They love their battleships or their warships. But I think they will have to maybe rethink that slightly.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Tretiak, we've seen remarkable progress in Ukraine's capacity to take out these major Russian vessels, and this shows how fast technology is evolving and being used on the battlefield. In the modern battle space, revolutions in technology are frequent and constant. Considering this, what can be done to address the dangers of the massive proliferation of sea mines beyond taking out Russian ships?
Розумію. Хочу додати щодо великих
like to join it about big vessels. It's also about that big vessels will take place in the big fleets, all fleets, but from time to time it will go back and go out from, because now we are staying on the border of the drones war, when drone will fight against each other and people will take only some activity in it. And also I would like to say that the main part in this drone process is like to save people's lives, because when the sea drone, they are expensive, but people's lives cost much more. So that even if the drone will be destroyed, but people's life will be staying, and it's very important for us. So machines should change people in this war at the maximum as it's possible, because it's the future of us. And the second one, only technological revolution that we did for these 2 years could, and for all the 10 years of the war, could help us, because these innovational projects, and also in the maritime sphere, like drones without staff and so on, they really shifted the balance in the Black Sea. That's why, if we talk about the classical scheme, we could say that having advantage on the Black Sea, it's when you cannot put your ships out of the ports, of the bases, and that's actually that we have already reached. But each mission that we have in this at the sea with these sea drones, it's every time it's a new challenge, and every time we have to think about new plans, new ideas, new routes, and so on, because our enemy doesn't want to give us these adventures, but we will take it anyway. About the big vessels, I would like to say that they will take part in the fleet anyway, but small ships, small drones, marine drones that are much more cheaper than big vessels, they can work and they can destroy big ships even with this size. So submarines and big ships still exist, but they will go into the backyard from time to time, because they will be changed and shifted to the groups of the small drones. Thank you.
So, Maria, may I make a couple of comments?
Hello, General Clark. Yes, please jump in.
Yes, thank you. So I'm trying to get my camera on here.
Well, we can hear you. Oh, and now we can see you.
Yeah, okay. So a couple of things to reinforce the comments the others have made. If this is an existential fight for Ukraine, then Ukraine must make it an existential fight for Mr. Putin. And this means taking the bounds off on the geographies. And that means Russian ships anywhere must be made vulnerable, and Russia must know that its navy is safe nowhere. Not in Tartarus, not in the Mediterranean, not in the harbors in Arkhangelsk. Nowhere is the Russian fleet safe. And I think that's an important opportunity for Ukraine to take its technology beyond the borders of the Black Sea. Secondly, I want to underscore the idea of going after Russian submarines. That technology is available. It is available with unmanned vessels. So far, we haven't seen any reports of oil slicks on the surface, but those submarines are down there, and they are vulnerable. They can be found, and they can be attacked. Third, I'd just like to express agreement with many of the speakers who have said that it would be wonderful if the United States would loosen the restrictions that it's imposed. I think it's time for all of us to understand that there's nothing sacrosanct about Russia or Mr. Putin's regime there. So he has no right to attack a neighboring state and expect that his own territory is a sanctuary. Not north of Kharkiv, not anywhere. So I think the bounds need to come off on this. For Ukraine, this should be unrestricted warfare. So things like Russian thermal power plants, they're a legitimate target. Heating plants, they're a legitimate target. So Ukraine should be able to reach as deeply within Russia as necessary to dissuade Mr. Putin from continuing his aggression. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Clark. Sir, are you still there? Because I got another question for you. Okay.
I'm still here.
Oh, excellent. Okay. General Clark, Russia was not prepared for what Ukraine was able to do to its fleet in the Black Sea, clearly. And while Russia has modernized, they have not done so as quickly as many thought they might. How do you think Russia may try to recover? And is there a threat from Russia still in the Black Sea?
Yes, there is a threat from Russia in the Black Sea, and they will strengthen their air power. One of the key problems we have with Ukraine is its lack of air power and its ability to penetrate. So this requires not only the assets, the F-16s, which regrettably have been held up, and I would encourage Ukraine to take advantage of what apparently is France's offer on the Mirages, because I think it's useful to have France providing an edge of ambiguity, uncertainty, and deterrence against Russia. And France apparently is willing to do this. But I think Ukraine's got to build up its air power, because the ability of Russia to strike through the air is still present, despite the Patriots and so forth. Yes, we need more air defense, but we need offensive air support and offensive counter-air. And Russia still has those aircraft. Russia has a lot of aircraft it hasn't used. Russia's been conserving its aircraft. So when it really feels that it's time to make the big push, Russia's going to use those aircraft to try to regain domination over the Black Sea and come in on the southern approaches of Ukraine. So everything that can be done now to take out those aircraft, wherever they are, is really important.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Tretiak, do you want to add anything to that? To his points?
Ну, так можна додати. Дякую. Дійсно, розвиток всіх технологій за напрямками безпілотних систем.
Of all kind of drones, especially marine drones, sea drones, both like water and underwater, like sub-drones. It's very important, and it took a lot of attention from our scientists, because Russia doesn't want to give us the victory and doesn't want to give us advantage in this sphere. So that each kind of special operation is planned very importantly for us, and they all different one from other. Yeah, for sure we have special niches like water or underwater niches. Maybe we will have like a hybrid system that will work both on the water and underwater, and it could give us a chance to destroy much more equipment in the port infrastructure of our enemy, for example. So, but anyway, the advantage on the Black Sea, on the state that we have now, with taking into account all the needs, it's very important for us to use these sea drones because it could have a great impact on the balance of advantage in the Black Sea.
Thank you, sir. Commander Mamulashvili, turning over to you. So the Georgian Legion is the first international legion to become part of the armed forces of Ukraine. What is the importance of the war in Ukraine, including in the Black Sea, to Georgia's security, and how does this continue to motivate you and your legion?
You know, generally Georgia is as much occupied as Ukraine right now, and unfortunately, Russian government is searching for harbor for their ships on occupied territories of Georgia right now. So that's a security problem for Georgia and for Ukraine also. So Ukraine should be given an operational freedom to fight enemy on Black Sea region as it should be done. So, you know, Russia is an existential threat for Georgia also, and for Ukraine. So that's why we're here. That's why Georgian Legion is one of the largest foreign formation in Ukraine. And from 2014, we're helping Ukraine to defend its sovereignty and freedom.
Thank you. And for our audience, we're going to turn to audience questions soon, so get your questions ready. Now, Luke, I know you follow Georgia closely, so if you want to add anything on Georgia, please feel welcome to do so. But additionally, can you talk about what lessons the U.S. and the West are or will apply from Russia's war in the naval space in the Battle of the Black Sea, and how these might apply specifically to the Taiwan Strait and or the Red Sea? Are there lessons learned from the military situation in the Black Sea as we deal with the Iranian-backed Houthi threat to international shipping?
Thanks. Yeah, of course, I can't resist an invitation to say something about Georgia, a country that I love so much. I'll say this, Mamuka is here with many Georgians fighting for Ukraine's freedom, and Ukraine will be liberated someday, and someday Georgia will be liberated from the Russian occupation, and I would describe this as probably business before pleasure for Mamuka. So going back to the lessons learned in the Black Sea and this proliferation of the use of unmanned systems against capital ships, warships, submarines. Yeah, there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think there will be a lot of lessons applied to other regions around the world. I don't think it's a neat one-size-fits-all solution, but I think if you have an area of water that has certain geographical, topographical, and in the case of Montreux Convention, geopolitical boundaries and constraints, then you're able to operate in a way that Ukraine has been operating to a certain degree of success. And there are other regions around the world where this applies. Immediately off the top of my head, I think of the Gulf. I think of the Caspian Sea, where many of the three littoral Caspian states have a certain amount of fear from Russia in the north and Iran in the south. So I think they are learning lessons. The Taiwanese will be learning lessons about what can be done with the use of unmanned, uncrewed sea vessels. And in the United States, we should also be learning these lessons, and I suspect that we are. I suspect our Navy is working closely with the Ukrainian Navy and intelligence services to learn what are the best practices, what will naval warfare look like in the 21st century. But I agree with Richard that we have to resist the temptation to perhaps to learn the wrong lessons. I think there will be a role for major ships in the future. And I think this is actually one area that we should also think about for Ukraine. Ukraine will need a traditional navy when this is all over. And we should be helping them build this now, and we should do it outside the Black Sea. I know some ships are being built in Turkey. I know that the UK has allocated some former mine countermeasure vessels to Ukraine. I don't think these should go into the Black Sea right now. I think they should remain outside the Black Sea, and there'll be a day when they will be needed and it'll be appropriate to bring them into the Black Sea. But yes, there are many lessons that can be learned and applied to other geographical regions around the world, but it is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Great, thank you. And thank you to our panelists for this insight. Now we're going to turn it over to the audience. There are people with microphones out there if you have questions, and please introduce yourself and make sure it's a question, not a comment. And I see some hands raised back there, if we could get some microphones to them.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you, Alexander, for inviting me. My name is Georgi Baramidze. I'm ex-Minister of Defense of Georgia in President Saakashvili's government. And very proud of private of the Georgian Legion because I was with Mamuka during 2 months of the Russian major assault. So what is my question and also kind of reminder, I would like to congratulate all the panelists with a very strong message, encouraging all our friends, primarily the United States, to be more courageous. So this is, I would like to echo this and strengthen the message. by reminding you what happened in 2008, why Georgia was survived. Yes, it was Georgia's fight, it was Georgia's soldiers' courage, it was unity of Georgia, it was unity of political leaders in European Union visiting Georgia and being with us in that very dramatic time. It was very helpful, but it was United States reaction. What was United States reaction? I remind you, all of you. First, United States sent six fleet ships are not here next to Odesa now. Why they are not here? And why then US president was ready to confront Russia in a strong manner and now it's not possible? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. I think if we were in charge, they would be here. But Luke, you want to?
I'll comment on that briefly. I think the reason why there are no U.S. naval vessels in the Black Sea is because of the restrictions that Turkey has implemented under the Montreux Convention. And I will say this, I do believe that on balance, it benefits Ukraine than otherwise by Turkey keeping the straits closed as they are right now. So I would love to see U.S. naval vessels into the Black Sea, but I think the benefits to Ukraine are greater by ensuring that the Russian Navy cannot bring ships from the outside into the Black Sea. And theoretically, there is a way for NATO to get ships into the Black Sea. It would take a bit of ingenuity, a bit of creativity, probably a bit of welding and some reconfiguration. But there are, and it would take some geopolitical pressure applied to Serbia and Hungary. But there are ships that can transit that are small enough to transit the Danube. We might have trouble going under a couple of bridges, but that can be modified to enter the Black Sea through the Danube. But there's no discussion or political will to explore this possibility at all. At least I'm not hearing any.
Thank you, Luke. And for our audience, while we have the lights, if I could ask you to keep your questions brief.
Hello, my name is Logan West, and I'm a research fellow at the Danube Institute in Budapest, Hungary. With regards to discussions about increasing efforts against Russia with unrestricted warfare, is there a concern that Putin may resort to using nuclear weapons, and is there a method to counter such a scenario?
Colonel Kemp, you want to take that?
Well, I think we've heard many times President Putin threatening to use nuclear weapons every time that NATO or Western countries have looked like crossing his red lines. He started shaking his nuclear saber, but without any consequence. I think I agree with what General Clark said about unrestricted warfare against Russia, including on Russian sovereign territory and in any part of the world where the Russian fleet is. And I don't believe that we should be afraid of a Russian nuclear threat. Of course, it's something that could happen potentially, but I think it's highly unlikely because I think Russia knows also the consequences for themselves if they decided to respond with nuclear weapons.
Thank you. Additional questions? Got hands back there.
Thank you. Thank you for your speeches. My name is Joseph Rabin. I'm a geopolitical risks advisor from Bratislava, Slovakia. You've been talking a lot about Ukraine's victory, and I know that this question is circulating a lot in policy debates and strategy debates. So how does this look? How is it looking in the reality? We know that Putin is threatening use of nuclear weapons should Ukrainian soldiers set feet in Crimea. How does it look in Donbass, where there is basically no Ukrainian population left because all of the Ukrainians have been they just left Donbass, and there's people that are really radical in their opinions against Ukrainian government. So I would like to know your opinions. How does this victory is looking like? Thank you.
Would you like to take that?
Перемога в будь-якому випадку буде за Україною. Щодо застосування ядерної зброї, виключати дійсно цього ми не можемо, тому що ми не знаємо, що в головах у кремлівських керманичів. Але колись мої молоді роки я служив в ракетних
and I was the part of the strategic troops, those who could use nuclear weapons, and Ukraine had these nuclear weapons till 1997, if I'm not mistaken. Unfortunately, we don't have this anymore, and that was really very great from strategical point of view. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, not just Putin opens a box and just pushes some button. At least 5-7 other people should be involved. So this is the commander of the missile troops, and also those people who are responsible for the box, and also 2 people who are there near the missile who could turn to the keys simultaneously. And these are just knowledgeable people, and they understand perfectly well the consequences. That's why it is not enough to have a will of one person in the leadership of Kremlin. This is not enough for the Russia to use nuclear weapons. Those people who have been dealing with it the whole life, they understand the consequences, because we know that there might be no winners in such a nuclear war. There is a threat, but there are a lot of factors for these weapons to be used.
We can't hear you, but we're going to let Luke jump in.
Right. As an American, when I hear this question, what is victory in Ukraine? It's very difficult, almost impossible for me to answer this, because I'm not the one sacrificing, I'm not the one bleeding, I'm not the one suffering in this war. Ultimately, only Ukrainians can decide what a victory, a just and fair victory, will look like. But we are committed to supporting Ukraine, and we have to have planning assumptions when we allocate our support for Ukraine. So the planning assumption for the United States, as it thinks about the best way to support Ukraine, should be the return to 1991 borders and the full restoration of Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, including Crimea. That should be our planning assumption. Now, if along the way, the Ukrainian government wakes up and says, we've suffered so much, we can't go on, our youngest generation is dying on the battlefield, the flow of weapons from our allies are not as fast and as plentiful as we had hoped, we just have to find a negotiated settlement, then the United States should support the Ukrainian government with the same amount of energy and support on the diplomatic front as we have been with military support. So I would like to see the full restoration of Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, but I'm not the one in the trenches right now. So it's up to Ukraine to determine what they want victory to be.
Thank you, Luke. I've got a question over here.
And can I come in on
Yes,
this
please,
for a second?
sir. General Clark, go ahead.
So I just want to underscore what Luke said, that it is up to Ukraine. But I think it's not just a political issue. I think Ukraine's military leadership has to show that there is a feasible path to military achievements which will attain the diplomatic objective. And I would encourage that you look at the Allied operations of D-Day in 1944. It looked that the English Channel and the coast of France were unassailable. The German forces were extremely strong. A raid was tried in Dieppe in 1942, resulted in 50% casualties from a Canadian brigade that attempted to seize this little town on the English Channel. In 6 hours, there was a loss of 100 Allied aircraft, a destroyer was sunk, and the Allies reeled back. It did delay a cross-channel invasion for 2 years, but the Allies were resolute that they would invade France. So I think it's not impossible. We shouldn't let the lessons of last summer's counteroffensive, which was unfortunately costly, more costly in terms of vision and willpower and resolve in the West than it was actually for the forces of Ukraine. So I think it's up to the military leadership and political leadership of Ukraine to craft the strategy that nations in the West can support that will show it's possible to restore Ukraine's borders. It's certainly in the interest of the United States to see the rules-based international order upheld. That's one of the reasons we're assisting Ukraine. And we can create the military plans that would roll back the Russian conquest. Ukraine needs to do that and ask for the support. And yes, it may take more than 25 F-16s. It may take more than 300 ATACMS missiles. It may take into 2025 or 2026. But for Ukraine, this is existential. All of us understand that if Mr. Putin gets the ceasefire that he probably wants and rebuilds those forces with Chinese assistance and Iranian assistance and North Korean assistance, that peace is not permanent, that those boundaries that are negotiated are not permanent. Certainly, those of us in the United States who watch this region for decades understand what the implications of a ceasefire are. So I want to call upon our colleagues and friends in Ukraine. It's your state, it's your nation, it's your existence. Give us what you need and let us in the West work to assure that you're provided what you need for success and restoring those boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we're going to take our final question with the lady with the microphone. But the good news is there are still 2 more questions. Okay. And then you got other panels after us to ask your other questions. Over to you.
Hello, my name is Ina, and I will be brief. I'm Odesa and really proud that we are here gathering and talking about the security issues finally in Odesa. So my question, actually I have a statement. It is obvious that today US regulations are helping Russians to kill Ukrainians. Considering recently signed security agreement between the US and Ukraine, do we have any chances that some of the policies will be softened as boots on the ground from DoD or ITAR regulations, so then we can act faster and actually not losing our people? Thanks.
Can I have a quick follow-up while I'm here? Thank you.
You got the mic,
sure,
but be quick.
thank you. I'm an ex-UK member of Parliament. Now have a charity, Angels for Ukraine. My comment is directed at either Luke or Wesley Clark. My fear is what Colonel Kemp has said, is that actually there is more diplomatic pressure than military support for Ukraine. And as an observer, I think the weakest link is Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan is Dr. No in the United States, and having a lawyer determine what Ukrainian military strategy is like watching somebody play checkers against Putin, who's playing three-dimensional chess. And I wonder if either Luke or Wesley Clark would like to comment.
General Clark, are you online?
Yeah, I'm online. Let me see if I can get my video back on. Look, I don't want to talk about personalities in the United States. It's not appropriate for me to address these issues in an overseas forum. But let me just say this, that the historical analogy is this. I was a young officer and fought in Vietnam. The conflict in Vietnam actually was winnable by the United States. However, there was a group in the White House, a very intellectual, very smart, very connected to Harvard, who thought that they could outthink the Vietnamese generals. And they carefully measured the air campaigns of 1964 and 1965 and 1966 that were striking into North Vietnam to send a message. They were very concerned about the possibility of provoking greater Russian and Chinese intervention in the conflict. They were oh so cautious and measuring things. And I can only say that the officers in the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff were intimidated, and they didn't speak up after their initial proposal to go into Vietnam, cut it across the 17th parallel, cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail and stop. Now, why talk about something that happened 50, 60 years ago? Because the same processes are at work. When this conflict began, the wise men of Harvard were summoned to the White House, and they were asked, what should be done? What should be done? There's a nuclear threat. And they used the Cuban Missile Crisis as an analogy. This is not the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the conclusion of all of this in Vietnam was seen in early 1990s when former U.S. Defense Secretary McNamara went to Vietnam. He spoke to the North Vietnamese generals 30 years after the war. And he said, didn't you understand that we could destroy you with our air power? And we held back on this just so you would understand. We didn't want to hurt you, really. We just wanted to signal to you how powerful we were. Why didn't you understand our signals? The North Vietnamese said to him, we didn't see it as signals. We just thought your bombing was very ineffective. And I wish our leadership in the United States, without naming any names, would go back to that era and look at the mistakes of putting political diplomatic signaling, mixing it in with military forces. It doesn't work. In this case, in Ukraine, it's up to Ukraine itself to define what's required for success. And then it's up to the supporters of Ukraine in all the countries of the world who recognize the significance of this conflict to speak up and support what Ukraine needs. And I will tell you as an outside observer that Ukraine must have offensive air power. It must have air defense. And it must have the ability to drive the Russians out of Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we will take our last question or comment from a very distinguished guest. Sir, over to you.
Well, thank you. Tony Abbott, one-time Prime Minister of Australia. I asked this question a little tentatively, but in the light of Colonel Kemp's answer a while back, I think it does need to be asked. If the Russian tyrant were to use nuclear weapons, what would be an appropriate response from the nuclear powers of the West? Would it be, for argument's sake, immediately admitting Ukraine into NATO and under NATO's protection?
Thank you for the question and for your leadership. Colonel Kemp, do you want to answer?
I think there'd have to be a very, very significant military response to a nuclear attack. Whether that was a retaliatory nuclear attack or not, I don't know. It could well be. Or it could be something like destruction of the Black Sea Fleet in totality or other Russian military facilities. But I think there would have to be, yes, I would say get Ukraine into NATO, but a serious military retaliation as well.
Thank you, sir. And on that note, we're going to end. Thank you to our panelists, to our defenders and heroes, and to our audience.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning, this afternoon.
Thank you, General Clark.
And